Charlotte of Mexico, the last Empress of America. In the gardens of Chapultepec, under the blue sky of Mexico, a young European woman contemplated what she believed would be her great destiny. It was 1864, and while Europe struggled to maintain its influence in the world, an ambitious Belgian princess became the center of one of the most daring and tragic political experiments of the 19th century, the Second Mexican Empire. This is the story of Marie Charlotte Amalie, Charlotte of Mexico, whose path from the European courts to an ephemeral throne in America would end in the shadows of madness and oblivion. Born on June 7, 1840, at Laeken Castle, Charlotte was the daughter of King Leopold I of Belgium and Princess Louise Marie d'Orléans. Her lineage could not have been more distinguished. Niece of Queen Victoria of England, related to the most important royal houses of Europe, and heiress to a considerable fortune. Charlotte's education was exceptional even by aristocratic standards. She mastered 7 languages, studied literature, sciences, and arts, and from an early age demonstrated unusual intelligence and determination. Her father, Leopold I, had previously rejected the crown of Greece and accepted that of Belgium. Perhaps from him Charlotte inherited that fascination with distant thrones and the imperial ambition that would mark her destiny. At 17, her marriage to Archduke Ferdinand Maximilian of Habsburg, brother of Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria, seemed the beginning of a brilliant life among the European nobility. The young couple settled in Miramar Castle, near Trieste, where Maximilian, removed from the Austrian imperial succession, dreamed of exotic horizons while Charlotte yearned for a role that would match her capabilities. The opportunity would come from across the Atlantic, wrapped in the mantle of a military intervention. The great ambition, an empire in Mexico. The context that would bring Charlotte to Mexico was a complex web of international interests. After decades of instability following its independence, Mexico faced a serious financial crisis. In 1861, President Benito Juárez suspended payment of the foreign debt, providing the perfect pretext for a European intervention led by France. Napoleon III, Emperor of the French, saw in Mexico an opportunity to establish a counterweight to growing American influence, create a client state that would favor French interests, and secure access to Mexican mineral wealth. To legitimize this ambition, he needed a European monarch who would give a veneer of civilization to the colonial enterprise. The offer of the Mexican throne reached Miramar in 1863. Maximilian hesitated, but Charlotte, at just 23, saw the opportunity of a lifetime. Persuasive and determined, she convinced her husband to accept the crown, imagining a benevolent reign that would transform Mexico into an extension of European civilization. As a condition for accepting, Maximilian renounced his dynastic rights in Austria, symbolically burning his bridges with Europe. On April 14, 1864, the imperial couple set sail for their American destination, carrying with them trunks of fine porcelain, European furniture, and grand dreams that would soon crash against the complex Mexican reality. On June 12, 1864, Maximilian and Charlotte made their triumphal entry into Mexico City. The streets were adorned with flowers and flags, but the celebrations had been carefully orchestrated by the French. Popular enthusiasm was at best forced, at worst non-existent. Installed in the majestic Chapultepec Castle, the imperial couple tried to establish a European-style court on Mexican soil. Charlotte, now officially Charlotte of Mexico, assumed her role with a dedication that surprised even her detractors. Unlike many colonizers, she strove to understand the country she intended to govern. She learned Spanish fluently, studied Mexican history, and took an interest in indigenous traditions. But beyond these cultural considerations, Charlotte proved to be a natural ruler. While Maximilian was distracted with ceremonies and botanical explorations, she presided over ministerial councils, drafted decrees, and developed educational projects. She created the first public transportation line in Mexico City, founded schools for indigenous girls, and promoted health reforms. Her workdays began at dawn and extended well into the night. This dedication stemmed both from her personal ambition and a growing awareness of the precariousness of her position. The Mexican Empire, far from being the jewel she had been promised, was a building constructed on quicksand. The legitimacy of the empire faced a fundamental challenge. The Republicans led by Benito Juárez never laid down their arms, nor recognized the emperors. From the north of the country, they kept the resistance alive, supported by a population that saw Maximilian and Charlotte as symbols of a new foreign colonization. To further complicate matters, Maximilian, with liberal tendencies, enacted laws that alienated his supposed Mexican conservative allies. Meanwhile, the end of the American Civil War in 1865 allowed the United States to exert diplomatic pressure against the French imperial adventure in its backyard, invoking the Monroe Doctrine. The definitive blow would come in January 1866, when Napoleon III, under international and domestic pressure, announced the gradual withdrawal of French troops from Mexico. Without this military support, the empire was virtually sentenced to death. Charlotte, understanding the gravity of the situation better than her husband, made a desperate decision to travel personally to Europe to plead for help. In July 1866, the Empress set sail for the Old Continent, beginning a frantic diplomatic tour that would take her from Paris to Vienna and finally to the Vatican. Her mission was one failure after another. Napoleon III received her coldly and confirmed the withdrawal of his troops. The Austrian imperial family, who had never approved of the Mexican adventure, was equally inflexible. The tension, exhaustion, and successive humiliations gradually undermined Charlotte's mental stability. The collapse came at the Vatican. During an audience with Pope Pius IX, Charlotte suffered a psychotic episode. Convinced that the enemies of the empire were trying to poison her, She refused to drink or eat anything that was not prepared before her eyes. She spent the night in the Vatican, an unprecedented privilege for a woman, drinking only water from a public fountain she believed to be free of poison. Doctors diagnosed a deep melancholy. But what Charlotte was really experiencing was the onset of paranoia that would never leave her. Her family discreetly collected her from the Vatican and transferred her to Miramar. The brilliant Empress, barely 26 years old, was sinking into a world of delusions from which she would never emerge. Meanwhile, in Mexico, the empire was crumbling. Without French support, and with Republicans advancing from all directions, Maximilian rejected opportunities to escape, determined to fight to the end. On May 15, 1867, he was captured in Querétaro. A month later, on June 19th, he was executed alongside his generals at the Hill of Bells. Charlotte never knew with certainty of her husband's execution. Her caretakers, fearing worsening her condition, kept the news secret, feeding for decades a weight that would never end. What followed for Charlotte was a limbo of 60 years, confined first to Miramar Castle, and then to Bouchout Castle in Belgium. She lived in a parallel world where she remained Empress of Mexico. Her days passed between elaborate rituals. She dressed formally for imaginary dinners with Maximilian, maintained a fictional court, and signed decrees for an empire that no longer existed. In moments of lucidity, the pain was too intense, so madness became a refuge. Her caretakers reported cycles of agitation and calm, but Charlotte never fully regained her sanity. She jealously guarded her imperial jewels and demanded to be treated with the protocol due to a sovereign. The world changed dramatically during her confinement. World War I broke out. The Austro-Hungarian Empire disintegrated, and monarchy as a political system went into decline throughout Europe. But these events barely penetrated Charlotte's mental universe. Anchored in 1866, the last survivor of the Mexican imperial adventure died on January 19, 1927, at the age of 86, in her Belgian castle. She had survived her husband and her empire by 6 decades. Ironically, the castle where she spent her last years would later become a center for bee research, a surreal epilogue for a life marked by destiny. Charlotte's figure has been interpreted in multiple ways over time. For traditional Mexican historiography, she represented the last European attempt at colonization, an intruder imposed by foreign bayonets. For others, she was a reformer ahead of her time, genuinely interested in Mexico's welfare, but trapped in impossible circumstances. The truth, as always, is more complex. Charlotte was both victim and perpetrator of 19th-century European colonialism. Her personal tragedy, from ambition to madness, reflects the contradictions of the imperial project, the sincere belief in a civilizing mission that justified the imposition of foreign models on sovereign nations. In Mexico, her memory persists in Chapultepec Castle, where her room is maintained as it was, and in numerous literary, theatrical, and cinematographic works that explore her complex personality. The Emperor Maximilian diamond, part of her dowry, continues to be one of the world's most valuable historical jewels. Perhaps Charlotte's most enduring legacy is as a symbol of the twilight of an era, the last gasp of direct European colonialism in America, and the definitive triumph of independent republics. Her story reminds us that even the most ambitious imperial projects can crumble in the face of resistance from peoples determined to forge their own destiny. Charlotte of Mexico, an extraordinary empress. Charlotte was the first and only European sovereign to visit the Vatican without wearing the traditional black veil, a privilege that reflected her exceptional status. During her brief reign, she introduced the first public transportation line in Mexico City. Her photographic memory and linguistic ability allowed her to remember the names of everyone who was presented to her and address them in their native language. In her delusions, she frequently conversed with historical figures such as Marie Antoinette, drawing parallels between their destinies. During her confinement, she maintained a strict routine of imaginary meals, where Mexican dishes she had enjoyed during her reign were served. Her diaries and correspondence, totaling thousands of pages, reveal a brilliant and observant mind, even amid her mental deterioration. Bouchout Castle, where she spent her last 50 years, is today the National Botanic Garden of Belgium, specializing in bee research and conservation. The story of Charlotte of Mexico, tragic and fascinating, reminds us that behind great geopolitical movements there are always deeply human stories of ambition, love, duty, and in her case, a fate crueler than death, oblivion in life.